Hello everyone and welcome back to Talking FLS. This is where I share some insights and my inspiration into the recent episodes of my podcast, Fine Line Station. I also share some fun facts and some Easter eggs as well. There won't be any spoilers for upcoming episodes, and in this Talking FLS, I'll be discussing episode 11, 12, and 13. There'll be a section at the very end talking about the ARG elements, but as always, there'll be a spoiler warning if you want to avoid any of them. Starting off with a huge thank you. I honestly can't believe I've finished season 1 of Fine Line Station, both in terms of the story itself, writing the scripts, recording everything, editing it together and then releasing it to the public. I'll try not to get too sappy, but I shared in the first video that this project has been one I've been wanting to do for a really long time. I've had the ideas swirling around and it's gone through so many different iterations until I finally had the time, the motivation, and a really clear, concise story that I could share with everybody in this podcast form. Again, thank you so much for the support, and I hope you enjoyed season 1. It's all out now if you're waiting to binge it, so please go ahead. All of the ARG elements in their current form will stay on the website as well, so you've got a bit of time to have a bit of a look for them. A couple of updates in terms of season 2 of Fine Line Station. Season 2 is the last season of FLS, and it will also have 13 episodes, plus a bonus 13.5, which will be going live on the 30th of October. On the 23rd of October, there will be a Q&A on the YouTube as well. So if you have any questions about FLS, I'll start collecting those soon and just share a little bit more insight and whatnot into the podcast. Again, making sure to avoid spoilers for future episodes. So that does mean there will be a 3-4 week break between the episodes, but then we're going to jump right on in. And then with my Thursday releasing schedule, there is the 1st of January. I will be skipping that week, but then jumping back in. Otherwise, it's going to come out the same as it has for season 1, coming out every Thursday morning. So with that, let's jump into the episodes. Starting with episode 11, Never Gone. This was kind of an emotional episode, and up front, this episode had no ARG elements. When I first started actually planning all of my different stories and whatnot, and I think I shared this in the first Talking FLS, where I kind of had a really rough idea, jotted down some notes, did the script, and then edited the script. With this one, I knew I really wanted to have like an online kind of friend experience, and there were a couple of iterations I went through, and I had another episode that was a little bit too similar to this one, so I ended up replacing it. But with this one, I didn't mean to quite have the sender be so young, I guess. When I had first planned it, it was definitely more of a creepy, eerie story, but just when I started writing out the script, and this one was really interesting, I only had a few dot points I was working from. Usually I would have, like if you were writing an essay, I'd have like a couple of paragraphs or sentences and I'd mix it all together, but this I just started writing, and once I started, I don't know, it sounds a bit cliche, but the story just kind of came to me. As someone who loves video games so much, and it is my favorite type of media, of course, I couldn't help but kind of gush about that a little bit, and really taking it from my like younger childhood self perspective as well. There is a lot of inspiration about that story taken from mine too. And then the whole like ADHD thing was just another thing that wasn't meant to be in the story, but it just fit really well. And then I kind of went down the rabbit hole research about ADHD and video games and how, you know, obviously you have the downside of becoming addicted to video games, but also how it can be a really positive thing for people to have all those senses fulfilled and whatnot. And yeah, it's definitely one of the saddest stories. I think both writing and recording it, I did get a little bit teary-eyed. I couldn't help it. I think, you know, we've all had friends or family pass, and it's always a tough time. And I think this specifically, this idea of like not realizing how lucky you are sometimes, because, you know, things go wrong in so many people's lives, but when you really think about these basic things of being able to play outside with friends and doing all these bits and pieces when some kids can't do that at all, is just, yeah, it's a really interesting thing to really think about and appreciate both what you had and what you have now too. And like many kids, I played a lot of video games. Me and my brother had a little bit of a limit. It wasn't quite as strict as the story though. And the amount of just random friends, a lot of the games I played were RuneScape, Club Penguin, Neopets, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, it's this really interesting idea of friends that I'm never going to see again. I don't really know much about them. I don't even know their real names, but forge such a connection and hold such an emotional importance to, you know, my happiness and fond memories and all of that. It's kind of bizarre thinking that this really nameless person had such a positive impact on me when I was younger. And I don't know, sometimes I like to think that those people out there, I hope they're doing well, whoever they are. I feel like where this really started as well, there's a video game called Journey where it's a beautiful game, the graphics are gorgeous, music's amazing, but essentially you play as this little guy and you run through these sand dunes and you can be paired with random people and there's no communication ways you just kind of have to interact and jump around and hover around something to be like, hey, stand on this thing over here, and you have to solve some pretty simple puzzles. But the atmosphere of the game is phenomenal, and again, the soundtrack is wonderful, but it kind of came from that as well, that nameless stranger, that nameless friend that really does impact you or can make you smile. I said it last time, but technology is something that as a subject in my artistic practice comes up all the time, so it's no doubt at all that it would come into this story as well with my podcast, because yes, it's a story, but honestly, it's a bit of an art project as well. It's just a bunch of stuff I love talking about, I'm interested in, just kind of formatted with a bit of a narrative. That's kind of what it is. It's a narrative art project. All right, moving on to episode 12, Getting Lost. This was another idea I had pretty early on. There are these children's storybooks called the Spiderwick Chronicles, and this could be a false memory. I don't actually know. I didn't actually look it up, but I have vague memories. They had like the little monster manual, if you will. And one of the creatures, it's like if you step on it, you forget where you are, you kind of get lost. And for whatever reason, that has just stuck with me since I was a kid and paging through all of those different monsters and whatnot. And I feel like that's such a good starting line to be like, yeah, when I was such and such, I got lost in my own backyard. Like, I feel like that's a very good, like, oh, what's going on here? So I had to play with that as well. You've probably heard me mention a lot of like creeks in backyards and whatnot. That's how I grew up, so a few of my stories have those as well. It's just a bit of a nod to that. The speaker of that story, the comment they made about like almost seeing like a double exposure when they're going places, it's almost like they're seeing what's physically in front of them, but also what's happening in their brain or what pictures they're viewing or stories they're thinking of. That's something I definitely experience a lot. It's still really interesting to me that some people don't necessarily think in like full colored, you know, pictures or movies or whatever, and some people think more word-based. That's such a strange concept to me, but I find it really interesting. And so I really wanted to lean into how I view the world, and as someone who is obviously always talking about stories and ideas, and as someone who makes a lot of 3D craft with costumes and props and miniatures, I'm always building and viewing things in my head, so it does genuinely feel like sometimes I'm seeing two things. And then this idea of not paying attention to where you're going, yep, I can raise my hand. I am horrific at this. It is a very common thing across my family and my friends that I have a very poor sense of direction. There have been many times when I just have been my head in the clouds, or I'm thinking of a story, or I'm too immersed in a podcast or music, whatever I'm listening to, that I just like don't even realize where I've gone. So like I really struggle sometimes getting places. If I've done it enough times, it's not too bad, but what really gets me is then having to retrace my steps, because I haven't necessarily paid a whole lot of attention getting somewhere, and then you have to flip it around. I have no idea how to get back to where I started. And I think it's probably mostly because I just don't pay attention. Like if I really carefully thought about what I was doing, I'm sure I could probably map something out in my head. But yeah, it's really interesting. For someone who is such a visual thinker, I still struggle a lot with like making little direction maps in my head. I think it definitely works best if I have landmarks, but yeah, otherwise I'm a bit hopeless. This was also an interesting episode. I do really like the idea of someone ending up somewhere unexpected, but kind of taking a step further and then also doing some kind of activity or acting without them even realizing that they're doing something, like the character in this story when they were on the computer and downloading something mysterious. I think that's really interesting, and I think it goes really nicely with this idea of, you know, kind of not paying attention to your surroundings and then how you can kind of manipulate that, I guess. And then moving on to episode 13, which is the finale of season 1 of Fine Line Station. Waking Up Wrong. This story, okay, this one has a bit of backstory behind it. Again, this is something I had planned quite early on. It was definitely in one of the original notes I did for FLS, and I knew I wanted this to be the season finale, like pretty much right away, because there is a bit of a slow build up, and I understand that. You know, I think the thing about Fine Line Station is that the individual stories are just as important as the overarching story. I know in some cases a few people have been like, oh, what's going on? When are we going to get more? Don't worry. It's coming, just feeding you a little bit here and there, but this was kind of a step up from that. Obviously playing with the distorted audio and sound, I've never done anything like that before, and I think I didn't go too over the top, I just did a bit here and there, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and hopefully it sounds alright to you all as well. And the idea of the abrupt ending too, definitely I feel like is a great little cliffhanger leading into season 2, and I really love how that turned out. Now the idea itself. So the very kind of initial stages of this idea, and it did end up changing again as I wrote more and more and finalized the script and the story, but it was actually really loosely taken from a fanfic I read a long time ago, which sounds really silly, but it was kind of this idea of someone going between two different places. We'll kind of keep that vague for spoil reasons, but waking up between two places and not noticing that right away, I think was the interesting part that really stuck with me. Obviously, like, multiversal stuff is one of my favorite things, so, you know, I love the idea of people jumping between them, like go full Spider-Verse. But what really stuck with me is this idea of the character kind of not knowing for a while that this is going on and then becoming aware. I think having a story of both of those situations where it's pretty normal to them and then suddenly it's not normal is a really interesting mix on that, and a really interesting take on this idea of essentially a time loop. That's kind of what it feels like, right? Time loops are probably my favorite trope ever. It is surprising I didn't go like super heavy into a time loop for this season, but this is kind of my little nod to a time loop where it still makes sense in the world. I really love the idea, and a few people did mention this to me, which is fantastic, but you read a paragraph and then you start rereading the same paragraph and you're like, you've read this already, why are you saying the same thing? But then you start to notice those little subtle changes between them. It's just one of my favorite things to like slightly trick an audience and whatnot, and I'm so glad I was able to put it in this podcast, and I'm really happy with how it turned out as well. And you know, in some cases it might be a little bit cliche, but gosh did I have fun with this episode. I was a bit worried about editing it at first, but in the end it was so much fun playing with it all, and I'm very looking forward to continuing on with some more effects that I played with. And that is episode 11, 12 and 13 of season 1. Quick chat about the ARG elements if you want to skip to this time to avoid them. For those who've been playing along, continue working on the website, trying out those names, thinking about the themes that were said. I'd say probably most of the episodes, except for episode 11, they have between 2 or 3 ARG pages or solves to happen. Some may have a few more than that, and some might just have one, which is like the main page for that episode. And the interesting thing with episode 13 is that you may or may not, but also may, have finally gotten an answer to a page that's been there pretty much since the start. So try a few things, listen to the episode, see if there's any key words you can pick up, and have a bit of a try with that. The ARG element will continue on to season 2. There's one other episode which won't have any ARG aspects attached to it, but the rest of them will. just have a bit of a continue on. I'll still drop hints here and there, sometimes on the Fine Line Station Instagram. In the little caption, I will put just maybe a sentence or two that could really help you figure out a little bit more about what's going on with the ARG. Again, it's not necessary to play the ARG to fully understand the story, but it is going to give you hints earlier on about what's going on, and almost like bonus content if you want to learn a little bit more about the story and the world. I've definitely noticed while writing FLS that there's a lot I can put into it, and finalizing season 2 has been really interesting. I kind of was going to add a little bit more, but I've drawn it back just a bit so it does flow a bit nicer and there's enough information both in season 1 and season 2 to pick up the story. But the truth is, I'm just not going to be able to share every single thing I want in the podcast because I still want it to flow nicely, and I don't necessarily want too many lore dumps here and there, just a couple, right? Not too many. And so I think the ARG is a really great way as well, where I can share those extra bits and pieces and just a behind the scenes on some of the stories and characters that I just won't have time to explore in the story. Depending how we go, for those ARG aspects that are a little bit more important or carry a bit more weight in terms of the story or the history of characters or anything like that, I'll probably be a little bit more obvious with them about posting online and sharing ideas with them, so keep that in mind as we go forward. And that brings us to the end of Talking FLS 3. It's kind of crazy again that I've done a whole season, and I am so looking forward to sharing more with you. Thank you so much for the support, the love, the feedback, and for playing along. I look forward to sharing the rest of the story with you, and again, we'll be back with episode 13.5 on the 30th of October. Until then, take care. See you later.